Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special webinar this evening on Nature's Calendar. British Science Week is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and the theme is time. So it's the perfect theme to partner up with the Woodland Trust on a very exciting project. Nature's Calendar is the longest written biological record of its kind, with almost 3 million records spanning nearly 300 years. And it's a collection of observations of seasonal events like the flowering of trees, like the emergence of insects. And because it dates back to such a long time ago, it allows us to investigate just how the seasons and nature are changing over time. And we are inviting you to play a part in contributing to this record by getting outdoors and spotting the first signs of spring. So we're going to show you exactly how to do that this evening, and we'd also love to answer your questions. So in the Q&A section of the Zoom, not the chat section, please ask your questions. I know that Kate on the team is ready and waiting to answer them, and we'll also be trying to get through as many as we can at the end of the conversation. And also please join the chat section and tell us where you're watching from, what community group you're a part of, and also if you've already taken part in Nature's Calendar over the years. We'd love to hear from you. But now, to tell me more and us all more about this amazing project, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Judith Garford. She is Citizen Science Officer at the Woodland Trust. Hiya, Judith. How are you?
Hi, I'm really well, thank you.
Good. It's really nice to talk to you this evening. And I'd love to know, first of all, how you got involved in Nature's Calendar and also what your job entails.
Okay, well, the great thing about Nature's Calendar is that it's a citizen science project, which means that anyone can get involved and contribute to real climate change science. And that's exactly how I got involved. So I started as a volunteer, as a citizen scientist, recording some of the seasonal changes that I could see in my own garden. I think one of my first records was monitoring the blackbirds that nested in my garden at the time. And then about 9 years ago, I was really lucky and I got a job at the Woodland Trust, looking after and running the Nature's Calendar project, and doing some of the science and analysing some of the data that I started off contributing as a citizen scientist, as a volunteer. And in fact, I'm still a volunteer now as well, as well as working on the project.
That's amazing. You started volunteering. Did you ever imagine that you'd be working, as a citizen science officer now, really helping to manage this incredible project?
No, I was just really lucky that the right job came up at the right time, and I'd already taken an interest, and I have a background in science and science communication, and yeah, it was really fantastic to be even more involved.
Amazing. Well, you're the perfect person to tell us more about Nature's Calendar. And first of all, it is based on the science of phenology. So first of all, what is phenology?
Yeah, so phenology, that's a word we don't hear very often, but it's the study of the timing of natural seasonal events such as plants flowering and birds migrating. So the word phenology, it basically means to appear. So like the leaves appearing again every spring, or the swallows appearing again from migration in the spring. And then it's looking at patterns and trends and relating to that to weather and climate. And I like to think of us all as natural phenologists, really. So, I hear people say things like, oh, aren't the daffodils really early this year? So that's phenology, really. It's just being aware of, when seasonal things should happen and are they early or late this year.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We're all phenologists then, without even realizing it. We love to talk about the weather. We love to talk about observations like daffodils and, oh, I saw my first snowdrop. It's definitely earlier than last year. So we're all actually citizen scientists anyway, without knowing. But this project really relies on citizen science. And for me, that's one of the most exciting things to talk about and learn more about. Because it really gives us all a chance to come together and give back to nature that gifts us with so much. But just how important is citizen science to this project, Judith, and how does it play a part in Nature's Calendar?
It's absolutely crucial to the Nature's Calendar project. So we absolutely couldn't run this project without all the volunteers that take part. So it's a UK project, so anyone can take part anywhere in the UK. You definitely don't need to be a scientist. And because the UK has very different weather depending where you live, So the timings of our seasons is also different. So spring, for example, tends to start in the very south in Cornwall, and will be, can be several weeks difference between the timings in Cornwall to the very north of the Shetland Islands, for example. So we need volunteer eyes on the ground all over the UK. And it's the value is in that mass data, the value is in the numbers. So when we get hundreds of records all over the UK, that's when we can start to see the patterns and the trends. And in the UK as well, there is no professional equivalent. So without the volunteers, there wouldn't be this data at all. For example, in Germany, their equivalent of the Met Office, their weather service, they record some of the same data in a professional network, but we just don't have that in the UK. So without our citizen scientists, we just wouldn't be collecting this data at all. So yeah, it's absolutely crucial, so important.
Yeah, it's quite amazing that in other parts of the world, there's a kind of an organization like the Meteorological Office who plays a role in this. But so it makes it all the more important that citizens get involved. But it also is quite empowering, isn't it, that we can all really do something collectively together to help nature. And when it comes to these amazing records, they date back to almost 300 years ago. So how did they first come about all that time ago?
Yeah, we're really lucky in the UK. We have this history of phonology recording, and it dates back to a man called Robert Marsham. He was a gentleman that lived in Norfolk on quite a large estate, and for 62 years he recorded what he called the 27 indications of spring. So that was things like the date when he first saw a snowdrop in the spring, the date when he saw a swallow for the first time each spring, and my favourite, the date when he first heard a frog croaking. I like that one.
That was one of his records.
Of the year. Yeah, that was one of his.
And he just took it upon himself to do that, Judith, back then. He just decided he wanted to observe the wonderful nature on his doorstep.
Absolutely. So I mean, he was obviously lucky enough to have large grounds in which contained lots of nature for him to record. And not only did he record for his whole lifetime, so that was 62 years, but then subsequent generations of his family continue those records in the same estate. And that record alone spans over 200 years.
That is extraordinary.
Yeah,
but of course, that's in one location, right? That's in Norfolk. So since then, how has the record evolved, and why was it important for it to evolve? You've mentioned it there when you mentioned citizen science, the importance of monitoring nature all across the UK. But obviously there was a need to do that, right? Because it was a whole load of great data, but just from one part of the UK.
That's right. So we consider Robert Marsham to be kind of the founder, because his records were published and then that inspired others to record.
Okay.
And in 1875, the Royal Meteorological Society set up a national recorder network. And this was like citizen science, really. It was volunteer recorders all over the British Isles. I think at the peak of recording, they had over 600 volunteers at a single time. So then they were starting to get data from all over the UK, and like you say, not just from Norfolk, not just one spot. And that continued for many years until just after the Second World War, so until 1947.
Amazing. And I do want to ask you about a very special woman when it comes to phonology, to this record, but also someone who's close to your heart, a lady called Jean Kums. Who was she? Tell me about her.
Okay, let me just share my screen so you can see a photo of her. Here we go. I hope you can all see.
Here we go.
I hope you can all see that. Sorry for the delay.
Ah, look. Oh, look at the picture on the left. That is adorable. So who was Jean?
So Jean is an incredible lady, quite an inspiration, and she has loved nature from a very early age. You can see her there pictured age 3 on the beach with her binoculars. So she has literally recorded nature and been interested in nature from the very beginning. And what's incredible about Jean is that she kept a nature diary, a nature notebook from being a child. And in that nature diary, she recorded the seasonal changes that she saw where she lived. And she did that for her whole lifetime, basically, until very sadly she died last year, age 96. It's quite sad because she said that she actually destroyed her very earliest records because she thought they were too childish. So we have her records from the age of about 20, but she had started making notes in her diary younger than that. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't still have those.
Could you imagine how seriously she took her work, that she just thought they weren't good enough? That's how passionate she was. But unfortunately, we might have lost, yes, quite a lot of important data. But she contributed. What particularly did she look at, first of all? What kind of species was she observing?
So she recorded all sorts of things, but some of her records in particular have become famous because the Royal Meteorological Society recording scheme that I mentioned stopped in 1947, but that coincidentally is just about when Jean started recording. So her records then fill this void when we don't have many other records. And yeah, they fill that time in history after the war when climate change was becoming a really important issue. And her oak budburst records in particular have become famous. So every spring she noted when the leaves just started to peep out of the buds on the oak tree near where she lived. And yeah, these have become famous. I'll share some of her data with you. Here we go.
So these are the types of graphs that Jean was creating based on all of her observations. And this one became famous then?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't think Jean was creating these graphs. I don't think she realized at the time how important what she was doing was.
Right.
But she got in touch with the Nature's Calendar project when it was being set up, and shared this data. And I think only really then was it realized how important it was and how it filled this gap where there was no other data. And that's when it became famous. So she did this as her own personal hobby, her own personal lifetime passion, without realizing how important it would become. So important, in fact, she got awarded an OBE for her services to phology.
I think it's really wonderful for somebody who was passionate about nature from the age of 3, never mind when she started recording nature at 11, to see the fruits of her labor, to see them, you know, really contribute so importantly. That must have been very satisfying for her indeed. You got to meet her, didn't you?
I did, yeah, I was really lucky. I went to plant a tree to celebrate her 90th birthday. And you know, her birthday and her incredible work, and what it shows us. So on this graph, we have the dates at the bottom, March the 21st, and at the top of the graph, the date May the 10th. So every dot on this graph is one of her sightings of an oak bud bursting open, the leaves just peeping through. And some years she saw that happen as early as March. Then other years she didn't see it happen until May. So from year to year, there's huge variability. It depends on the weather that year, if it's a warm spring or a cold spring. And that's why the graph is so zigzaggy, because it changes so much from year to year.
Yeah.
But I wanted to point something else on the graph to you. So I've highlighted here 2 points. So in the first half of the graph, there are only really 2 years when she saw the buds open in early April. Mostly she saw it in late April, in May. But if you compare that to the second half of the graph, she saw the buds opening lots of times in early April. And over the course of her lifetime, there is this general trend that the bud burst was getting earlier because of the warmer springs. So yes, her records have proven really crucial information about how our seasons are changing.
It does. It provides absolutely crucial information in what is relatively a simple procedure, right? You just look out and you pay attention to what nature is doing, and that tells you a lot about how our environment is changing, how nature is changing. That's fascinating stuff. So Jean undoubtedly contributed so much to Nature's Calendar, but when did Nature's Calendar actually become known as that?
So it became known as Nature's Calendar in about 2000. So Professor Tim Sparks realised that the national recording scheme that we talked about before had finished. There was this data from Jean that was filling the gap, but again, this is just one location in Surrey this time.
Yeah.
And he realised how important it was to re-establish a network over the whole of the UK so that we could gather this information again. And importantly, he realised it needed to match with that previous recording scheme, so we'd be able to compare back to what it used to be like in that period. And so Tim at the time, he worked for the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and he set up a recording scheme. I think he contacted as many people as he could that he thought might want to get involved, and it was all on paper forms. and they'll send them back to him, and he'd have lots and lots of paper forms full of data. All of that needed typing up to be able to be used. And so then in 2000, he contacted the Woodland Trust to ask for some help. And since 2000, the project's been run as a citizen science project at the Woodland Trust, so that as many people as possible can get involved, and we can take this to a much bigger and wider audience and collect lots of data.
There's clearly some key individuals through the history of these incredible records, but then it's also about collaboration and getting as much help as possible, which is why we're talking about this this evening. So Nature's Calendar has been part of the Woodland Trust for almost 25 years, 24 years now. How has it changed over that time at the Woodland Trust?
So it started as a paper recording scheme. So twice a year we would send out. In fact, I didn't work on the project then, but paper forms were sent out twice a year to all the volunteer recorders. They'll keep those for 6 months, noting all the dates of the things all the seasonal changes they were seeing, send them back after 6 months, and then the data needed to be typed up before it could be looked at and used. And there's this delay. So over the past 25 years, it's gone online. Now you can record on the Nature's Calendar website. And when you add a record, when you add a date of something you've seen, that goes instantly onto our live maps, and we can track the seasons happening real time, which is really exciting. And not only that, because it's been running for 25 years, the data is getting more and more interesting. So the first year, you have nothing to compare it to. The second year, you can say, well, was it earlier or later than the previous year? But now we have, a decade of data we can compare this year to, or 2 decades. So the data is getting more interesting and more usable. And not only can anyone take part in adding records, anyone can ask to use the data for research. So more and more over that 25 years, the data is being used by scientists all around the world for climate change research.
And other types of research about the nature. It just goes to show how informative that kind of longitudinal data dating back to almost 300 years age is. And you mentioned climate change there, obviously one of the biggest challenges we're facing in our history. Tell me, how exactly is this data able to contribute directly to climate change research?
So it contributes in several different ways. One way in particular is something called the Spring Index. So let me share my screen with you again. Okay. Here we go. So because we have so much data coming into the project, there's hundreds of species and events you can record. We need to simplify that a bit to look for patterns and trends and to understand what's really going on. So one of the things we do is calculate this Spring Index. So we look at 4 seasonal events in particular. And one of these is the swallow returning to the UK after migrating to Africa over winter. One of these is hawthorn flowering in the spring. Another is the orange-hipped butterfly appearing for the first time in spring. And the final one is the horse chestnut tree flowering in spring. And we get all the dates for these 4 events from all over the UK, add them all together, turn them into an average to create a single index for each year. And then we can look each year whether spring is earlier or later compared to previous years.
So when we were speaking there about, the fact that it's over a long period of time and we can look at how things change every year, how the seasons change, that's what you mean about contributing to sciences like climate change research in particular, but all sorts of different observations about our changing planet. So my question to you then is, this is Nature's Calendar at the moment. These are the species that it uses for spring. Why only 4 species, 4 event changes? And how does that actually help you to understand what's happening to all of nature in the UK and how that might be changing over time? Why do we only need 4?
Well, we could have chosen from many, but these 4 in particular were chosen because you can find them all over the UK. Okay. Perhaps the very north of Scotland, you might not find orange tips, but on the whole, you can find them all over the UK. They're quite easy to identify once you get the hang of it, because there's not really anything that they're easily confused with. Yeah. So that's important. And then, so from year to year, it's weather that affects how early or late spring is. But when we talk about climate, we have to think about much longer time spans. So climate is basically weather over decades or 2 decades or 3 decades. And this is where we're so lucky, because we can compare the data we have now to data from the Royal Meteorological Scheme that we talked about earlier. And then we have a long time period to compare the data, and we can look at changes over the long term. So that's when we can look at how climate change affects our wildlife and not just the weather of a particular year.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah. So tell me what kind of graphs you're producing from the spring index. What can this show us?
Okay, so here's our spring index graph, and
Yeah.
it's very much like the graph that I showed you from Jean Kums' data.
Jean. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's really zigzaggy. You can see the index changes a lot from year to year. We have early years and we have late years. And again, that's just to do with the weather that year. Did we have a warm spring or a cold spring in that particular year? So on this graph, there's actually two sets of data. The dark blue data at the end is all the data from nature's calendar. And the greeny colour line at the beginning of the graph, that's the data from the Royal Meteorological Society. So yeah, it's really important that these 4 species we record now and were also recorded in the previous schemes. And then if we take an average of the Royal Meteorological Society records, which is the red line at the top, and then we compare that to the average of the Nature's Calendar records, then there's a difference of 8.7 days. So it's showing us that spring, symbolized by these 4 events, has got, over a week earlier over this time frame.
Yeah, I mean, it's really clear. It really shows you exactly what this data can produce and what it's telling us about the changing of our seasons. So if there wasn't enough of a reason to want to get involved, to contribute to this extraordinary data, I don't know what could be. This is really compelling to me. So let's get into how you go about identifying properly the 4 species that you spoke about so that we can all contribute to the record. How do you go about it? Is it fairly straightforward?
Yeah, I think so. And, there's lots of help available as well. So I'll start with Hawthorn. So at this time of year, well, depending where you live, the hawthorn trees are probably still bare. They're probably just still twigs. If you're further, I'm in Yorkshire, so they are still bare in my neck of the woods, but maybe further south, you might have got some leaves already. So that's the first thing at this time of year to start looking out for if you want to identify a hawthorn tree. So if you have a look on the big picture of the leaf, I think it looks like it's kind of being cut up with scissors. So it's very what we call lobed. So the leaf is kind of divided into several sections. It's as if someone's got a pair of scissors and snipped it up almost to the centre. And that's quite a clear indicator that it's a hawthorn leaf. And they're not very big, they're about 5 centimetres, they're not huge.
Yeah, those really handy ways of describing things, it's like somebody's snipped the leaf almost to the center is a really good thing for people to remember because there are so many different types of leaves. That's very handy. So thank you. Things like that always help.
Yeah, and then another clue is in the name, so hawthorn. So it is a thorny tree, a thorny shrub. You can't really see any in that particular picture, but not all the branches have thorns, but they're not huge. They're about 2 centimetres long. But that's another clue that you're looking at a hawthorn. So I think definitely wait until there are some leaves, which will happen in the next week or two if it hasn't already, depending where you are. And yeah, that's going to be your main clue. And then the seasonal event we're really interested in, if you want your data to go into the spring index, is the first flowering. So the flowers are beautiful. They've got these 5 white petals, and when they open up, insides have anthers, but they're those pink bits, the pink clusters you can see in those images. So you're looking for those flowers, and the date that we want is when the flowers just start to open for the first time. So if the petals are open enough for you to see inside, that's good enough. That's the date we want. If all the flowers are wide open, if all the petals are wide open and they're starting to look a bit tatty and those lovely pink anthers have turned black, then they've been open for a while and you've missed it. So we don't want to know that date. So what you have to do, you have to choose a hawthorn tree and then monitor it regularly, like at least once a week, until you do see those flowers just start to open, and then that's the date we're interested in.
Fabulous.
So there are actually 2 types of hawthorn, 2 species of hawthorn in the UK. So there is something you could confuse it with. But once the flowers are open, if you have a look at the big photo of the flower here, there's an arrow and it shows you there's just 1 stigma in the middle. If there's 2 or 3, then it's not the right species. So once your flowers open, have a good look, and there should just be 1 stigma in the middle. And then
you might make the mistake of following one that's just opened, and then by the time it's opened a bit wider and you see 2 or 3, then it's not that tree. But it's part of the fun. It's part of the investigation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not sure, then take a photo and add that to your record, then we can always check. Don't be worried about getting it wrong. We're
Very
here
good,
to help
very
you.
good. It's all part of the science. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so the second event we'd like you to look out for is horse chestnut first flowering. And horse chestnut is the conker tree. It's the tree we know as the conker tree. This time of year, you won't see conkers, that's an autumn thing, but you might see some of the shells still lying about at the bottom of the tree. So that's a good clue you've got the right type of tree. Again, at the moment, depending where you live, probably there aren't many leaves or any leaves open yet. So look for these huge, big, brown, sticky buds. That's quite an easy way to identify them, because I can't think of another species that has huge, really gluey, sticky buds like that. They're quite distinctive. So that's your first clue. And then when the leaves do start to open, I like to think of them opening like an umbrella. And the leaves are made up of lots of different leaflets. So it's like the palm of your hand. They open up like this, and like the 5 leaflets open up until they spread like a palm. So then you've got your horse chestnut tree. And again, it's a first flowering we're asking you to record. And when the flowers first open, they're yellow inside. In this photo, you can see there's a mixture of yellow and pink, and they start yellow. And then once they get pollinated by insects, they turn pink. So if they're all yellow, they've not been open for long. And if they're all pink, they've probably been there for a while. So again, that's another little clue about the timing. But again, find a tree that you can see every week. Make it part of your routine. Could be something you pass on the way to work, on the way to school, at the bus stop, in the supermarket car park, whatever it is. Find a tree you can monitor regularly, so you know that date when the flowers just start to open. Then our third seasonal event is swallows returning from migration. Beautiful birds. So you want to look for this forked tail, this really long forked tail that you can see in the picture. And they've got beautiful white underbellies and then a red throat. And they'll be returning from migration from Africa. And you often see them sitting on telegraph wires. That's a good place to look. In a way, it's harder to record than the hawthorn or the horse chestnut, because you can't find a tree and trees stand still. Once you've found them, they're there. Of course, swallows move around, so it might be harder to spot them. But you need to find a location you can keep an eye out regularly. It might be your office window, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, or your local park, but somewhere that you can look regularly and see if you can spot a swallow this spring.
Lovely. And the final one is a butterfly.
Yes, the final one is the orange tip butterfly. So the male and the female butterfly look quite different. It's the male butterfly that has the orange tips. So they're the easiest to spot, and you can't really confuse them with many other butterflies. So if you see a butterfly flying by with those orange tips to the wing, you know you've got the right one. The female is plain white. It doesn't have those orange tips. So it's a bit easier to confuse with other white butterflies. So if you can, wait till it's still and you can see the underside of the wing, because it's got this green camouflage pattern that you can see in the picture here. And then you'll know it is definitely an orange tip, even though it doesn't have that orange tip. So again, it's the first time you see one of these butterflies in the spring, because over winter, they'll have been in a pupa, in a chrysalis. So it's when it gets warm enough for them to break out of the chrysalis and start to fly around. That's the date that we're looking for.
Amazing. That's very helpful indeed, Judith. If anyone is still a little bit unsure of what they're spotting, what can they do?
So don't be worried to get in touch. So if you go to the Nature's Calendar website, which is naturescalendar.woodlandtrust.org.uk, and scroll to the bottom, there's a contact us form. So yeah, just pop a question in there, and that comes to me. So it feels a bit like you're just typing to a robot on a form, but it's coming to real people, it's coming to us, and we're more than happy to answer any questions. The Woodland Trust has a free app for helping you identify trees. So that could be really useful for the horse chestnut and the hawthorn. And that's got loads more pictures and images to help you. So that's another thing. And then if you add a record, you can add a photo with it. So that just gives it an extra bit of information that we can check if you're unsure.
Excellent. And just to recap for you, what are the most important aspects of recording these sightings and how to go about it if you want to get involved this year?
So Nature's Calendar is all about dates, it's all about timing. So although we do need to know where you've seen what you've seen, because if it's in Cornwall, it will probably happen earlier than if it's in Northern Scotland. It's the date that's so important because it's about the timing of the seasons. So
Right.
choose a location to monitor regularly, look out for the very first time you see something, and it's that date that's so important.
Okay. And it's not just a one-off sighting either, is it?
No, so if you enjoy recording, we'd absolutely love you to keep recording for years and years and years, because then you'll have a record like Jean Kums and you can see what happens over a long term. So yeah,
Get
we'd love you to
involved
get
in
involved.
that.
There's things to record in autumn too. We're just focusing on the spring index today.
Okay. But also when you've picked your tree of choice or your area of choice, it's not just a one-day thing. You've got to keep your eye out and sort of make it part of your routine for a while, right? You've got to kind of stick with it for a bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So ideally, next nice day, go out, explore your local area, find a location you can look for the swallows or the butterflies, or actually go and find one of the trees, and then visit it at least once a week until the flowers open, and
Okay.
be perfect.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. So, I mean, I'm inspired. I'm sure our viewers are inspired too. Once they're ready to get out there, they've picked their tree, they know what they're going to be looking out for. They might decide to look for all four of them, which I think I would highly encourage you to. How do they go about recording it, right? Entering the data. Is that quite complicated or is it straightforward?
It's fairly straightforward. So I can run you through it now. I'll share my screen and I'll show you the Nature's Calendar website. It's being a bit slow. Here we go. It's
That's
coming.
all right. It's technology.
There we go. Can you all see
Lovely.
that?
Yep.
Okay, so here is the Nature's Calendar website, and there's lots of information you can have a look at, but to take part, you do need to register and create an account. And once you've done that, and you're ready to add your first record, you simply click on Add a Record here. And then it gives you an option of different species types. So, for example, the horse chestnut is a tree and the swallow is a bird. I wanted to mention this just because hawthorn is classed as a shrub, so that's not obvious to me. So I'm going to use that as an example now.
Good to know. Brilliant.
Yeah, we'll choose shrub, and then we go, and you can find hawthorn here in the middle. So you choose your species. I've chosen hawthorn, and here's first flowering. I'm actually going to use first leaf now as my example because it's a bit early for first flowering. So if I try and do that now, the website will actually ping up a few alerts.
Okay.
Just for now, I'm going to give first leaf as an example. Imagine I'd seen first leaf yesterday. I'd choose the date. So I'd choose yesterday's date, the 13th. And then here's an important question. It says, let us know the last time you visited this location before making your observation. So this is basically the question to say, have you been monitoring regularly, or have you gone on holiday, spotted a hawthorn leaf one holiday, but you didn't check the weeks before? So be honest. You can say within 7 days, or you can say, actually, I haven't been checking every week, but at least let us know. And it pings you up a little warning. You can keep going. It just marks it in the database as the timings might not be quite as accurate. But
and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But just don't fib in case you might feel a little bit bad. But it's still important data. But make sure you're kind of honest about when, because that adds the right amount of the right type of data that we need. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But hopefully, mostly you'll be able to say within 7 days and continue.
That you gently encourage people to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have to choose your location on the map. So the very first time you do this, you won't have any saved locations. So there'll be nothing in this box here.
Yeah.
But you can search on the map. So Woodland Trust head office is in Grantham, so I can search. Oops, I can search Grantham, Lincolnshire, and then it brings it up, and you can zoom in. You can change to satellite view, which if you're recording a tree, once you've zoomed in, you can normally actually see the individual trees. I've chosen like a street with no trees on here, haven't I? Here we go. If you zoom in here, you can actually see individual trees if you zoom in far enough. So
that's so cool.
Be as accurate as you can. And try and get that pin where you saw it as near as you can. I'm actually going to cheat here. I've got some locations saved, so I need to say Woodland Trust 1. Right, that's where I saw it. Next, it will if it's the first time you've added a location, it will ask you to give it a name. It's just so it's easy for you to remember, and then it's there in that drop-down box the next time. So you can call it whatever you want, like my garden or bus stop tree or local park, whatever you want to. Give it a name and then click next. And then you get a little summary of everything you've put in to check before you finally submit the record. So Hawthorn first leaf, it's yesterday, it's at my Woodland Trust location. And here's an opportunity. You can add a photo if you want to, and you can add a comment. So you might say, oh, it's been really sunny all week, and I first saw a butterfly because it's been so sunny. So it just gives a bit more information to your record, but that is optional.
Nice.
And then you simply,
and as you mentioned, if you're unsure about the tree or the flower, you can post the picture, and even in the comments, just ask a question. I wasn't too sure, but just letting you know. And then that adds to, again, to the data set and how useful it can be, right?
Yeah, those comments are particularly useful if you see something that's unusually early or unusually late. And it just, the reason I didn't show you Hawthorn first flowering is I said it pings up some extra alerts. So yeah, if you see something very unusually early or late, it actually sends us an alert to our email inbox, and then we double check those records. And it mostly just shows us something really interesting is going on and alerts us to it. So that's really good too. So there you go, you've added your record, and then that appears instantly on a live map. So if you go to analysis up here in the corner, and say, see our live maps. So let's have a look at hawthorns so far this year. So we can choose shrubs, we choose hawthorn. We'll go for bud burst because that's already happening. And we've chosen this year, press apply. And here we go, here's a map of the UK. And there's a slider at the bottom, and that's the time. So the very first record of hawthorn leaves appearing this year was added on, looks like the 30th of January. And then I can move the slider along. And as time has gone by, you can see more volunteers have added records. And you can actually see it creeping further up the UK as I go. This is quite a good example of spring starting in the south and moving north.
Yeah.
And your own record as well appears in orange, so you can see your very own record on the map and compare it to everybody else's.
It's just brilliant. It's so joyful just to watch that in, sort of in real time since January, and how people around the UK are contributing to that. How do you feel about seeing so many people around the UK helping out in something that you've been passionate about for so long?
It's really wonderful. And I suppose the other quite fun thing about this map, you can say, oh, actually, does anyone else record in my patch? Or by adding a record where I live, am I filling one of the gaps? Because, that's really important. So some areas we have more records than others. So if you're in an empty patch, your record's even more valuable.
Fantastic. Or you can make friends in the woods where you're looking out for the same things.
Yeah.
It's really, it makes me very enthusiastic. There's something really joyful about a collective of people doing something for nature like this. What have you found about your citizen scientists, how they might have changed over the years, what the community is like at the moment for Nature's Calendar?
So because recording is online, unless you actually get in contact with questions or for help, I tend not to get to know individual volunteers kind of one-to-one personally, but we do know some of volunteers and some things about them. So for example, we know that some volunteers started volunteering for the project in 2000 when it was set up by Tim Sparks, and are still volunteering now. We have some absolutely amazing volunteers that have dedicated 20 plus years to this project, much longer than I've been involved. And their records are starting to look like Jean's graph, because they've got that long length of time, which is fantastic. Then we know we have other volunteers that add one record 1 year and nothing more. And do you know what? That's fine as well. That's still contributing. That's still adding. And then we have volunteers that like to add. They like to look out for loads of species. They might love birds and add loads of bird records, or love botany and add loads of plant records. And then we have volunteers that just record one thing, but record it year on year on year on year. So for example, snowdrops in the spring, you might have one in your garden or on your street, and you just record that every year. And all of that is brilliant. So it doesn't matter what type of volunteering and how much time you want to give, all of it adds up to create the bigger picture.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, I would like to invite Alex Marshall to join us. She is Citizen Science Assistant at the Woodland Trust. Hiya, Alex, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
It's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to ask you a few questions about your experience with Nature's Calendar. First of all, how did you first get involved?
Well, I got involved actually through my job at the Woodland Trust, and so I started here last summer because
Right.
I was looking for a job that combined my environmental science interests, but also working with the community. So it's like the perfect fit. Um, and since then, I've been getting involved with Nature's Calendar, setting up my own records and following species. Yeah.
Amazing. So part of your job as well is to obviously recruit more citizen scientists. But first of all, like we would like to get more young people involved. We know that across the UK, some of us are still quite disconnected. And this is, for me, the perfect opportunity to maybe get young people more off their tablets and their phones and out into nature. So tell us, first of all, how your experience as a young person, working on Nature's Calendar has been. What's been the most joyful part of it, the most surprising? How would you
Yeah.
describe it to other young people?
Yeah, well, I've loved working on Nature's Calendar, mostly because I feel like proud to be contributing to something that's so important and that's been going on for so long. And in terms of working in citizen science in general, I think it's something I've been part of citizen science sort of my whole life in a way. I've always got involved with things like the Big Bird Watch, and there's all sorts of things that you can get involved with, which is amazing. Um, I love how citizen science provides opportunity for anyone to get involved, and that's to use as like you could learn a learning resource, a way to network with other people, to give back to society, or like in my case, I used it as a bit of a stepping stone into a career. I know actually Judith did that as well, which was interesting to know.
Has she been quite an inspiration to you, Alex?
She has indeed, yes.
That's lovely to hear. So if there are any young people watching who are, they're curious about it, but they might not feel confident yet to sort of take part in something like this. They've never really done something like this before. What would you say to them?
I'd say just make a start because it's probably a lot easier than you expect it's going to be, and you never know where things could take you. And I also wanted to say that what motivates me to work on projects like Nature's Calendar is just everything we do makes a difference in the world. And yeah, being part of conservation is just like my passion. And I know there's so many young people out there who feel the same. So we're really keen to get more young people involved. So do feel free to send us an email, Nature's Calendar at woodlandtrust.org.uk.
Brilliant,
Would love to
brilliant.
hear from you all.
If there was ever a better voice, honestly, Alex, thank you for sharing sort of your enthusiasm and your love. And Judith as well, when you were describing how to identify the 4 different species, I mean, your passion was coming at the screen at me. And I suppose what I would say is also once you give it a try, I always find nature works. It's magic, right? There's so much joy to be had just hanging out outdoors. I have no doubt that if you give it a try, you'll probably get hooked like we all are and want to be out there more and more often. So thanks for those words, Alex. And Judith, that's been so interesting and so helpful. So thank you so much. I'm just going to look at the Q&A. I know that Kate on the team has been answering your questions online as much as she can, but I'm just going to check if there's any others that Judith and Alex might be able to answer. There is one from Shivani Sharma here that says, and Judith, you kind of dealt with it, but just to reiterate, how do you know if the citizen science results are accurate enough, though, are usable for the record?
So part of the reason we need lots of volunteers to take part is that the power's in the numbers. So it's when we have records from all over the UK and we combine them to make an average that we know that the data is good. But also we compare our data to recording schemes from other countries, and it surprises me every time. So we publish in the State of the Global Climate Report, for example, where our tree data is compared to tree data from some other countries in Europe. And it's the same type of zigzaggy graph. But you'd be surprised how well the data from the different schemes kind of matches each other. And that always gives me confidence as well that, yeah, we're seeing an early spring at the same time as other countries in Europe are seeing an early spring, and it all matches together. So you can see the Nature's Calendar data is like one piece of a bigger jigsaw.
That's really nice. And Maggie McCallum was asking just that, are other countries, such as our European neighbours, using something like this? And is there a standard approach and indices so that, we can compare the data? You've kind of answered that. Yes, there's different schemes that are doing the same thing. And it's one thing, collective data here, but then across, countries and continents, it's even more valuable, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. So there are I mentioned in Germany that their weather office collects the data, but for example, in the USA, there's a citizen science project equivalent to Nature's Calendar there that's collecting data in the same way, and in lots of other countries as well. And there's a European network as well. So yeah, everyone working in the phology field shares data, puts it together to tell the bigger story.
Okay, lovely. Pamela Gardiner says the Hawthorn blossom here in Kent, Gillingham in Kent, has been out for a couple of weeks. So is it too late to tell you?
Oh, I'm jealous. Yeah, it is in that case, although it can quite easily be confused with blackthorn flowering, which is earlier, and cherry plum as well. So obviously if you're up close and you can see the leaves and you're sure it's hawthorn, then yes. But if you've just seen, like Hedges turn blossom from your car window or something, it might be worth a check, because blackthorn flowering is happening now, and so cherry plum. So just it could be that hawthorn will happen in another couple of weeks.
Okay, Pamela,
but also if it is too late, and it's definitely hawthorn, there are other things you can record throughout the year. So it's not just first flowering. In the autumn, you can tell us about the fruit ripening and the leaves changing colour. So if you've got a hawthorn tree you want to monitor and it's too late for first flowering, keep an eye on it, and then there's other things to record all year round.
Okay. So that's a really crucial part of this, isn't it? If you get on the website, you can see that this is not just a spring index that we're asking you to contribute to. This is a year round, long into the future. You can help contribute to nature's health and recovery, to help us find solutions to climate change by taking part in monitoring all sorts of different natural events. So Pamela, first of all, maybe take a closer look at some of those leaves and flowers. And if it is indeed hawthorn blossom, well then, why don't you get on the website and see what else you can be looking out for and contributing to. An anonymous attendee says, what have you found most interesting or surprising about working on Nature's Calendar? Alex, I might ask you that.
Ooh.
What's been most interesting, surprising, something you didn't expect?
I love seeing the observations. That's what's most interesting to me, because we get to see what everybody's seeing around the UK. So yeah, I just love seeing everybody's pictures, if they're sending in pictures or comments. Yeah.
It's a feel-good thing, isn't it, to see all of us together?
Yeah.
Doing something so special and so joy-inducing. I mean, if your ego was to play a part in it, like, you feel good about yourself for doing this. And when you see everybody doing it together, there's a real good feeling. And we need more connection to each other and to nature, don't we? I think this is the perfect way of doing that. But you can see how joyful you are about it, Alex. Judith, is there anything that you found about Nature's Calendar over the years that has been interesting, surprising, unusual?
I think what's surprising for me is that it's different every year. So I've been involved running the project for almost 9 years. Yeah. And you'd think like you'd start to see a regular cycle. And of course you do with the general seasons, but I don't think there's been 2 years that have been the same. So you might have a very warm early spring. So January might be really warm, but then February and March might be cold, or it's so different every year that actually the timings are slightly different every year. And yeah, I find that really interesting. Yeah, it's always changing.
Even though we're aware that there are trends from the collective data, it's also lovely to watch nature at play and how things differ depending on different circumstances year on year. Proper science. It's lovely. Joanna Gilliot, I hope I'm pronouncing your surname properly, Joanna. Apologies if I'm not. She says, I've been having a quick look at the live maps, and it looks as though you get relatively few records in Scotland. Is that really the case? Are there less records in Scotland in general, year on year, or?
Yeah, so record numbers basically match population distribution. So we get more records around the bigger cities where there just are more people living. And if you go to the Highlands of Scotland, where there are just less humans around, we also get less records. So, if you're lucky enough to live somewhere like that and you can fill one of those gaps in the map, we'd be so grateful. It's, it'd be absolutely brilliant. And in Northern Ireland as well, we get fewer records from Northern Ireland.
Okay, perfect opportunity for a call to action and for everybody watching this evening to get in touch with your friends in Scotland and Northern Ireland and just ask them to have a look at the website and tell them about your experience, and let's get more people involved, especially in some areas that have a little bit less data. Jen Stevenson says, can we see the results of the data collected like the graphs shown earlier? I presume they're all online. Is that right, Judith, on the website?
Yeah, if you go to the analysis section where the maps are, there's also a few other options. So you can look at our seasonal reports, and you can look at research that's kind of ongoing but not yet published. And you can look at publications as well. So whenever we're aware that something new has been published, we put that on there to try and keep everybody up to date.
Lovely, lovely. Margaret Lund says, I've got Hawthorn hedges rather than trees. Will this count?
Yeah, so you can, what we want you to record is mature trees and shrubs. So not brand new saplings, because they behave slightly differently. But so hedges are fine as long as they haven't been recently pruned, because that again can affect it. But if it's a hedge that's been left for a while, then that would be okay.
Lovely, lovely. And Hamish McClay says, asks, do these records indicate the style of summer we can expect?
Sorry, ask me that again, Liz, sorry.
Does the spring index indicate the type of summer we can expect year on year?
I don't think it does really. So it doesn't really predict what will happen going forward. It's more about looking back at what has happened. Yeah, I don't think we can predict the future weather from the older records. Okay. But there are. I'm trying to think of an example. I can't off the top of my head. There are some like myths and legends, aren't there, and folklore that I can't think of a very good example at the moment. But like about ash or oak, we're in for a soak. There you go. So if the ash leaves are out before the oak leaves, we're going to get rain. There are some sayings like that, but we haven't found a lot of evidence in the data to support that.
Okay, lovely. And there was another question asking, does it matter if spring is earlier by just a few days, especially when we're all desperate for the spring to come after a cold, wet winter? Do a few days really matter, Judith?
So we might all enjoy the warmer spring weather coming a bit earlier, especially here. It's been really wet. But what we're finding is that different species are affected at different rates. So, for example, the trees might respond quite quickly to warmer weather and grow their leaves sooner in a warmer spring. But the birds that nest in those trees might not react quite as fast. And caterpillars, for example, eats leaves on oak trees. So if it's all about the timings and food chains getting out of sync. So everything would need to change at exactly the same rate for everything to keep up. And that's not what happens. So as spring gets earlier, some of our species are affected more than others. And that's where the problems start to arise. And there are some publications around that you can have a look at on the website.
Right, lovely. So you've got information about those types of things. So just because spring comes sooner doesn't mean everything has sped up at the same rate. That's not how nature works. Some animals will naturally be behind, and so when they're ready to emerge, they won't have the leaves because the leaves will already be, or the young shoots, they'll already be too developed. So it causes a problem with the entire food chain. And then also overall, what it's showing us is you might not think that a few days matters, but when it comes to climate change, all of these events changing contribute to a changing planet, which is why we're facing the crises we're facing with biodiversity and climate change. So, but thank you for that. That was really interesting. We're out of time just about, but I wanted to ask you, well, maybe the two of you, just two final questions. One final question, because you've answered how you found recording events yourselves, taking part in Nature's Calendar and what joy it brings you and why it matters to you. But I suppose I'd love you to give our audience a final few words of why this matters, why this record is so important. And also people might think, oh, it feels a bit time consuming, to pick an area, pick a tree, and then sort of constantly go out. And, I don't really have the time. It feels like too much of a commitment to make. Alex, what would you say to people if they're sort of feeling, oh, it's not really for me?
Well, I think it doesn't really take that much time when you think about it, like how much time do you spend every week watching TV, for example? So you can fit it into your daily routine. So walking to school, or maybe there's a tree outside your office where you work, or whatever example. I think it's something that is quite easily fit into your routine as it is. So it shouldn't be too difficult to get started, I don't think.
Yeah, see, I agree with you. And when it comes to becoming addicted to our phones, I am guilty of scrolling. And next minute, I know an hour has gone by. And the advice is given about, forming new routines can feel a little bit difficult. But once you're into it, it's much easier than you might think. And also, you're out in nature and all the benefits that that gives you. So it's just about giving it a go, isn't it? And getting
Yeah.
out of the routines where you're wasting hours on the couch or scrolling anyway. Judith, I'm going to ask you for your sort of final words of encouragement. What would you say to people about nature's calendar and why it matters and why they should get involved?
So, I like to think back to Jean Kums. I find her to be an absolute inspiration. And so, could you be the next Jean Kums? If you're a young person, you've got that, that gift of time ahead of you. Could you have the next really long graph that continues this legacy into the future? Yeah, I find her and her story absolutely inspirational. So yeah, I think that'll be my leaving words.
That's lovely. And just think about it, you could have a legendary graph named after you that's immortalized forevermore, and when it comes to contributing to the most important thing you can contribute to, which is the health of the planet that gifts us with just so much. Well, that was really interesting. I am completely inspired. So huge thanks to Judith and to Alex, to British Science Week, and of course the Woodland Trust, and also the People's Postcode Lottery, who are the current funders of Nature's Calendar, because without them, the citizen science work wouldn't be possible. So thank you all for joining us. And if, like me, you feel inspired, get on the website. Once again, it's naturescalendar.woodlandtrust.org.uk. All the information is there. Feel free to write an email to Judith, who will answer personally any questions you might have. And get online this evening before you have your dinner, register, set up an account, and take part in giving back to nature. As I say, that gives us with so much. The 4 species we're asking you to look out for are already making their first appearances in Kent for sure, and other parts of the country, but lots of them are just about to make their first appearance. So it's quite an exciting time to get involved. And if you end up having fun out in nature, which I guarantee you will, you can get involved in Nature's Calendar all year round and for many years to come. So good luck with it. I'm sure you're going to have lots of fun. Thanks again to everyone. And thank you for watching. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
guys.
Bye.